Mr. Speaker, I don't want to take away from my colleague across the way if she wanted to speak. I certainly like to give her an opportunity, but perhaps she doesn't want to do that. I was just excited to hear my colleague's speech about trade, Mr. Speaker, because we believe on the impacts of trade and the great benefits of them. And it's his examples were phenomenal when he talks about how we can watch countries rise and gain the advantage in every area when they embrace things like free trade and they set aside protectionism and they set aside trade barriers for their country. So we're excited to be able to be here tonight and to see some of those examples where that has worked around the world. Mr. Speaker, there's kind of two aspects to what I want to talk about tonight, and one of them has to do with the bill on Latin America, but the other one has to do with the Filipino community in our country and the role that they play, because Senator Enverga was such an important part of that. And I want to talk a little bit about him and his phenomenal impact on both that community and on his adopted country. My riding is in southwestern Saskatchewan, and it wasn't an area where over the years that we've had a lot of Filipino people in our riding until about 10 years ago, when the temporary foreign worker program was put into place, the SAFS nominee program was put into place, and people began to come into southwestern Saskatchewan to fill roles in manufacturing and some of the service industries or whatever, and they have come to be a major community in southwestern Saskatchewan. And they've been a community that makes a huge contribution to our community as well. And it's interesting, they've gone from just a few hundred people to between 2,000 and 3,000 people in a community in southwestern Saskatchewan. And they support each other. Swift Current is kind of the center of our community in that part of the area. And they go in, they're great contributors to the local economy, great contributors to local communities. They're great partners. They just fit right in. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, they have such a strong family focus. It's a reminder to the rest of us to continue to make sure that we focus on supporting our families and the relationships there. And they have provided great leadership in our community in Saskatchewan, but Senator Enverga has certainly provided that leadership in Ontario here. And I would just like to talk a little bit about the role that he has played. I didn't know him all that well, but sometimes, Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity to meet people. As soon as you see them and you spend a little bit of time with them, you understand these are people who have a lot of influence because they're willing to commit themselves to other people. And he was one of those people who was like that. I think, first of all, it was obvious he was a man who loved his country. He loved Canada. Everything you hear about him is he was a tireless worker. He was somebody that put himself with passion into the projects that he was involved in, and certainly it was full of energy all the time. I think probably few of us are that enthusiastic about our country, and it certainly is a reminder to us that we can play that kind of role of really bringing people up with us. As mentioned earlier, this evening his first Filipino on the Toronto Catholic School Board, and I saw some tributes to him after his passing from people who said he played such an influential role in their lives, even to this day, of the things that he initiated and the relationships that he had with them. Of course, he's more famous in his role as a senator. He was appointed in 2012 and came in and played an important role. And it's interesting, it wasn't a long time that he was in the Senate, but the Speaker of the House of Commons, or the Speaker of the Senate rather, when he passed, had this to say about him. And he said, in every aspect of his parliamentary work, Senator Enverga was not shy about sharing his deep love for Canada. It has been a privilege to serve with him, and I know he will be dearly missed by everyone in the Senate family. And sometimes we say those kinds of words if someone has passed away, but from what I could see, every person that knew him felt this way about him and had a deep appreciation of who he was and what he had done. And so we need to recognize his service in the other place. And Mr. Speaker, he was somebody who actually who loved others as well. He was very committed to his community, but it was interesting. He worked for 30 years, I think, with BMO and the Bank of Montreal and served there. But he was a strong family man. He was a fierce advocate for people with disabilities, and that may be tied to the fact that one of his daughters was Down syndrome. And when we meet parents who have a child with disability or whatever, often there is a deep compassion, not only for their own children, but for other children of similar situations and for their parents. And Senator Enverga was one of those people who had that depth of character from serving his family. again, in his community, he was a person who was loved in his community. He launched the Philippine-Canadian Charitable Foundation, and it was a foundation that had a lot to do with trying to help both the new families coming into Canada and then also trying to help back in the Philippines in situations where there were disasters and those kinds of things. And it's just interesting that he talked at one point about the fact that he had the opportunity to be in the Senate, and he said the Senate has come to bolster representation of groups often underrepresented in Parliament. That's what he really wanted to do, such as Aboriginal peoples, visible minorities, and women. And he said, his quote was, "We as visible minorities and Asian senators have a responsibility and an ability to share and contribute our unique values, skills, and culture to complement and enhance various Senate roles and duties in the country as a whole." This is a person who saw not only that he loved his country, but he loved the people around him, and he was willing to work towards that as well. It was interesting, one of the people said an anecdote that he was a person who went to church regularly, and often people would be wondering if they could talk to him about some of the roles that he could play around here and some of the ways he might help them, and he was always available after church on Sunday if people wanted to talk to him. Some of us tend to run away and hide when we're in public so we don't have to do work 24 hours a day. He was one of those people who was happy to greet people and bring them in to his life. He was also a person who loved God, and he wasn't shy about that. And actually, one of the things I just think I appreciated most is his wife had a couple comments to say after his passing about his character. She described her husband, he'd been married for 34 years, as a person with a heart for those who needed help. Her words were that his drive and focus has always been rooted in his fervent faith. He's always been a man of faith, and who he is rooted in that, and he believed in putting his community ahead of himself. And so this is a person who, it's not a surprise that he had the kind of influence that he did in our country. And she actually said, "My husband would want to tell everyone, please stand up for your faith. No matter what you do, no matter what position you have, stand up for your faith." And this was a person who wasn't ashamed of that. He was willing to take that with him into his life here, and certainly had a significant impact on a lot of people around here, and we're aware of that. And I've done a lot of work on international religious freedom, Mr. Speaker, and he reminds me of other people I've met who are willing to pay a tremendous price because of the things that they believe in and the things that they hold very dear to themselves. So it's time goes too quickly on these speeches, but it does in other places as well, and he clearly left us far too early. He still had things to do. He had a couple of bills before the House, S-242, which would protect consumers. He was working on this bill, obviously, S-218, and he was trying to bring the national anthem and singing of it once a week into the Senate as well. But I do want to just close, Mr. Speaker, by reading a tribute from his friend, who is Romy Raphael, who is the president of that foundation that he started. Hopefully I can get through this before we're done. But he just said about his friend, his passionate drive to help those in need, especially in their time of need, show in his involvement in numerous charitable causes. And this is how the PCCF came to be. Before being appointed to the Senate by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, he created it in October 2010 in order to help the poorest of the poor in the Philippines. He was a selfless man who loved his country and genuinely wanted to help the people in it. He was determined to help. He once said in his speech, "We are not afraid to fail. We may fall, stumble, and cry, but we will stand up stronger and fulfill our mission to charity." By his example, he inspired people like myself to be an advocate for positive change and to help those in need. And then he finished by saying, there's a saying that goes, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Even though you are no longer with us, Senator, your spirit will live on through those whose lives you touched. Your legacy will continue, and you will forever be in our hearts. May you rest in peace, Senator. We will miss you.